Thank you for being part of this. I do a lot of, let's get this back up to the, do a lot of training with municipalities over the term of council, both with members of council and with staff right around Ontario. And I have to tell you, I think this is probably the most important session I do every 4 years. I've been doing this for several elections now, and I think it's important information if you're considering running for council and some of the issues that you need to give some thought to before you put your name in to register as a candidate. It's now open for you to register, by the way, and you have until August 19th at 2 in the afternoon to do so. So there's some time to do it. I'm not here tonight to talk to you about election issues in terms of the technical details of it. That's the clerk who is the chief returning officer for the election, and that's who you should be contacting if you have questions. We're going to see over the next hour, and there are a number of reasons for that, and I'm going to share some of that with you as we go through this material. One of the things I get asked fairly regularly is what I look for in someone running for council. The two factors I always look for is someone with integrity and someone who has a vision for their community. And I think those two things are significant in terms of the impact that person will have on council. I'm not going to spend any more time on this. I've been a closed meeting investigator and integrity commissioner. I've worked with large municipalities. I've worked with a lot of small municipalities over the year. And I've been fortunate to be named by the Association of Municipalities on their honor roll as a municipal coach. So here's what we're going to talk about. I do a program for what is called Municipal Government 101, and it can take anywhere from a day to 3 or 4 days to complete. We're going to try and do it tonight in about 7 minutes, and we're going to get you through and get some of the basics of local government and what it's about. So we'll do that, and then we're going to talk about municipal powers. Municipal powers are important because they lay the foundation in terms of where powers come from and who within the organization has the authority to exercise powers on behalf of the municipality. So we'll spend a bit of time on that. I mentioned accountability and transparency. We'll go through some examples of that and what's involved in terms of local government being transparent and being accountable to the community. One of the key elements in running for council is having an understanding of what your job description is and where that comes from, and what the job description is for different people within the municipal organization. I want to spend some time on that so that you have a real sense of what you're running to do, what your responsibilities are at the end of the day. I'm then going to shift gears a bit and talk about some personal considerations, right from the reality of what happens the day you're elected and how your life changes. And then we're going to talk about some personal considerations around codes of conduct, conflict of interest, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and I'll spend a few minutes on confidentiality, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the supply and distribution of water within the community. So that's what we're going to deal with over the next while. And as Heather indicated, we're going to have lots of time for questions at the end, and we'll make some notes as you go along if you want, so that you remember to ask them as we get to that part of the program. If I were doing this live, I would have the audience join me and spend a few minutes putting together a list of what local government does. This is, I think, a really critical exercise if you're thinking of running for council, because the scope and breadth of municipal services and services provided by local government is pretty astounding. I encourage you after you're finished tonight, to sit down with a piece of paper and list as many services that you possibly can. If you get to 50, you've done pretty well. 75 is better, but there are well over 100 that municipalities provide. And I think it's important to have a sense of that. And when you do a list, I think it's more important to do it at ground level as opposed to at the 30,000 foot level. What I mean by that is, just don't write down the word roads. Identify half a dozen or a dozen different activities that are involved at the municipal level around roads in your community. In speaking to Heather before, take some time, develop a list. One of the situations that's different is municipalities have what are called local boards. And local boards are entities that are separate from the municipality but connected to the municipality. And local boards provide services that the municipality itself cannot provide. Let me give you an example. If the community wants a library, a public library, council cannot offer that service. It must create a public libraries board, and it's that board that is responsible for the library service. There's a connection between the library and the municipality, but they are two separate entities. And there's other local boards. DSAB is a local board. Conservation Authority, health units. There are a number of different agencies. Business improvement areas are all examples of services provided not by the municipality itself, but by other agencies connected to the municipality. So do the exercise. It's a really interesting one. And if you get stuck or you don't feel you're getting many of them, look on the local, your Kenora website. And I think you'll find that a number of them are mentioned there. And you may want to do some research in terms of what some of them are. The scope is enormous, but also a number of the services provided are very technical and highly regulated. And it's important to have a sense of that. And I'll talk about that near the end when we talk a little bit about water systems and water distribution systems. So let's move on. I said at the outset that municipal powers are important because it's really the foundation of what municipalities are. All municipal powers come from the province, and that goes back to the British North America Act. We've heard the expression that municipalities are creatures of the province, and that was reaffirmed this last year by the Supreme Court of Canada. You may recall in the middle of the election campaign 4 years ago, the province reduced the size of council in Toronto by half. And people felt that was unfair, it was unreasonable, and it was illegal. It worked its way up through the courts to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of Canada said that the province had the power to do that. So the starting point is all powers come from the province. There is no inherent jurisdiction in municipalities. You have to find the power at the provincial level, either in a statute or in a regulation under a statute or act. a bit of a history lesson. In 2001, the province rewrote for the first time, top to bottom, the Municipal Act. Municipal Act is probably the primary piece of provincial legislation that impacts municipalities. There are over 100 statutes that impact municipalities, but the Municipal Act contains a lot of the provisions around what municipal government structure is and what powers are granted. Before the 2001 Act, and that was the first time it was rewritten in 150 years. Before that, municipalities were created and named based on size. So there were villages and townships and towns and small cities and big cities. And as the municipalities grew, the powers grew. So a village got very few powers, townships a bit more, and so on. In 2001, that all changed. And the province said there are now only 3 kinds of municipalities in the province. The first is
Sorry about that. Fred's just joining again here, so just give us a minute. He's getting reconnected. There he is. Oh, you're muted, Fred. There we go.
Yeah, my apologies for that. Had an internet issue. Heather, where did we leave off on this?
You were at the Municipal Act had just, or hasn't been changed in the last many years.
Right.
And you were starting from there.
Okay, so in 2001, the act was written for the very first time, rewritten for the very first time in about 150 years. Pre that time, municipalities were identified as villages and townships and towns and cities, and powers were given by the province based on the size. So you could tell the size of the municipality by the name it had, and the powers were given as it increased. In 2001, all of that changed. And as of that time, there are only 3 types of municipalities in the province. The first is single tier, and that's Kenora. In fact, it's every municipality in Northern Ontario and some in the south. And the bundle of powers that comes from the province, every single tier municipality gets the whole bundle. So it's not like pre-2001 where townships got fewer powers than towns and towns fewer powers than cities. Every single tier municipality gets this bundle of all the powers from the province. The other 2 kinds of municipalities are 2-tier. They're upper tier, which are counties and regions, and lower tier, which are the towns and the cities and the townships within a county or within a region. In that situation, the powers are divided between upper and lower tier, and we really don't need to get into that tonight. You can't tell anymore the size of a municipality by its name. I know Dryden's had some discussions. Dryden's a city, at least it was the last time I looked. I know they're talking about reducing it in size, but it's been a city, and its population, I'm not sure, is 8,000 or 9,000, 9,000 or 10,000 maybe. The town of Oakville, just outside Toronto, is a town, and its population is about 200,000. So you can't tell by the size. And there are townships in Southern Ontario that are 20, 30, 40,000 people. So you can't tell by the size. And there are some municipalities, as you know, Red Lake, for example, that just goes by the name municipality of. So you can't, it doesn't have to have one of those titles as part of its name, traditional titles. Section 5 of the Municipal Act came in 2001. And it is, I think, maybe the most important section in the Act. And it's really simple. And it says this, that powers shall be exercised by council and shall be exercised by bylaw. Powers, municipal powers shall be exercised by council by passing bylaws. First word to notice is the word shall. Shall is mandatory. So the province said that the powers shall be exercised by the council by passing bylaws. It doesn't say powers shall be exercised by individual members of council or by the mayor or by staff. It says that they are exercised by council by bylaw. Bylaws have to be passed at what I call a duly constituted meeting. And here's what goes into making up a duly constituted meeting. Here's what's required for a council to exercise power on behalf of the municipality. The first thing, municipality has to give notice. Municipality has to tell the public when council is holding a meeting, whether it's a regular meeting or a special meeting. It has to tell the public when a committee is meeting. It has to tell the public whether it's an open meeting to the public or a closed meeting. This is part of the requirement of transparency, the ability of the public to see and be aware when meetings are being held. And that notice is important because it also includes the agenda and the reports that are on the agenda and the items that council is being asked to deliberate at that particular meeting. notice to the public, and notice is given not by the council, but by the clerk. It's a responsibility of the clerk. So Heather is responsible for preparing and getting that notice out. And it traditionally now goes on to the municipal website. So if you go to the Kenora website, you can find all the upcoming meetings, both for council and for committees. The second principle as part of a duly constituted meeting is it has to be open to the public. Council cannot exercise power. Council cannot pass bylaws at a closed meeting. The meeting has to be open to the public. The courts have said over the years that the most significant element of the public being at council meetings, attending, whether it's virtually or in person, is the ability to observe how decisions are being made and the debate that goes along with it. So the second element is this ability of the public to observe how decisions are being made. The third element is quorum. The quorum is defined to be a majority of the members of council. I'm going to use an example of a council of 5 members. I know Kenora is larger, but let's take a council of 5. The majority of the council is 3. So as long as there are 3, 4, or 5 members on my 5-person council, that's a quorum, and a meeting can occur. If it's less than that, then it is not a quorum, and there cannot be a meeting. The next principle is everything is decided by majority vote. So if all 5 members are present in my council, it takes 3 to pass a bylaw or to pass a resolution. That's a majority of the members present. If there are only 3 present, we know that's a quorum. In that situation, 2 must vote in favor in order to carry, pass the bylaw or exercise power on behalf of the corporation. The last principle is that all members vote. That includes the head of council, head of council being the mayor. And we'll talk a bit more about that role in just a few minutes. So those are the requirements for a council to exercise power, to pass bylaws. All of those items have to be in effect in order for council to exercise power at any meeting, at any council meeting. I talked about open and transparent. Let me give you some examples. Probably the best one is the fact that meetings have to be open to the public to make exercise power and make decisions. There is an ability for councils and for committees of council to hold closed meetings, but even those, there's an element of transparency and accountability that goes into those as well. And there are 3 things to give thought to. First is, there's a list in the Municipal Act of those types of matters that council can go into a closed meeting for. And it must be one of those items, one or more of those items go into a closed meeting. Council cannot simply go in for whatever reason it wants. It has to find a reason within the provincial legislation. The second element of transparency is council must pass at a public meeting a resolution indicating, firstly, that there's going to be a closed meeting, and secondly, what the general nature of the matter to be deliberated at the closed meeting is, or matters. It can be more than one. So that's the second element, this public resolution. And council is prohibited from dealing with any other issue except the issue that is set out in that public resolution. The third element is the province indicates what council can do, what types of votes it can take at a closed meeting. And again, that's set out in the Municipal Act. So those 3 things together create a framework, if you will, for allowing closed meetings. Since 2008, the province has required every municipality in the province to have a closed meeting investigator. And the closed meeting investigator will investigate if someone complains that an improper closed meeting has been held. And there'll be an investigation, a report will go to council, and that report becomes public. I indicated at the outset, I was part of a company called Amberley Gavel, and we acted for over 140 municipalities around the province from 2008 right through to 2019. And we did well over 100 reports for municipalities during that period of time. So there are a number of issues, and it relates not merely to meetings at City Hall, but it can relate to meetings that members of council get together outside of City Hall at a coffee shop or in somebody's rec room, or they start a chain of emails to each other, to all the members. They can be improperly called meetings. So again, it's this concept of being transparent in the decision-making process. Another example of accountability and transparency is the policies that council has to have. There's a list there. You can see what they are in general terms. I just want to mention two of them tonight. The first is there is an actual policy called the Accountability and Transparency Policy. And it is required by every municipality. And these policies, by the way, are passed by bylaw of council. So they are exercising power on behalf of the corporation. The Accountability and Transparency Policy is an important one if you're thinking of running for council. And if you are, I would urge you to go to the municipality, go to the website, and you should be able to find that policy and read it through. And it will give you a number of examples of how local government is transparent and how your government, particularly in Kenora, is transparent and how it's being accountable for decisions that are being made. The two at the bottom are relatively new. The one relating to council member staff is one that deals with the relationship between individual members of council and individual staff. And it is tied in to the council code of conduct. And the province put this in relatively recently to deal with issues where there were some municipalities having difficulties in terms of that relationship. So all of those policies, again, are examples of transparent and open government. I said at the outset that roles and responsibilities is really significant, it's really important. Interestingly, if you're thinking of running for office, it's useful to know what the job description is. What are you putting your name forward to do? What are your responsibilities? And the province has set job descriptions for council and for the head of council and for staff. And I think it's worth a few minutes to talk about this, because people sometimes have a real misconception in terms of what they're running for office to do and what their responsibilities are. So let's look at and see what the province has set out. Council exercises corporate powers. Municipalities are corporations. And so in a sense, council is like the equivalent of a board of directors of a business corporation. But the council has a number of significant powers beyond what a business corporation would have. Council represents the public. Individual members of council are in the community. You're hearing from the public. You're bringing those thoughts to the council table. And that's part of the role that you fulfill, and it's an important one. You won't see that same requirement under the staff job description. It's a primary purpose of what you're being elected to do. The next bullet point talks about the well-being, considering the well-being and interests of the municipality. And that's important. The word municipality in this instance, I think, has two meanings. The first is the community, the geographical boundaries of the city of Kenora, if you will. Council members have an obligation to consider the well-being and interests of this community, this city. But municipality also means the municipal corporation. And council members have an obligation to consider the well-being and interests of the municipal corporation. And so that's legislated, but it's also contractual. Municipalities have policies of insurance, and in those policies, members of council and staff have an obligation to act in the best interests of the municipal corporation. So it's legislated and it's contractual, and it's significant in terms of the importance of that. The next bullet point, I've talked about acting collectively. You make decisions in public, and you tell people in advance that you're going to be dealing with specific matters on an agenda. Here's the key. There's nothing in the legislation, the Municipal Act, or any other provincial statute that gives any management responsibilities to council or to members of council. So if you're thinking of running because you think you can do it all and you think you can direct staff, that's not your job. It's not your responsibility. And I'll talk a little bit later about the difficulties that can create within a municipal organization. Council's role is the setting policy and making decisions. So it's the high level responsibilities, and we'll see how that plays out in just a few minutes. If you are elected, part of the training, orientation training for new councils, we'll talk about the individual powers and what they are and what limitations are on them. I'm not going to get into them tonight, but there are some, and they'll be noteworthy at the time. Remember the 2001 Act? Well, before the 2001 Act, the provincial legislation talked about mayors, reeves, and wardens and chairs. And these represented being the head of council for specific types of municipalities. So mayors were the head of council for towns and cities, reeves in townships. Wardens are the head of county in Southern Ontario, head of counties. And the chair is the chair of regional government. So the regional council has a person who has the title of chair. In 2001, that all changed again. And these references to mayor and reeve and warden and chair disappeared. And the act now refers to head of council. And the powers and responsibilities and duties given to a head of council, it doesn't matter what type of municipality it is, whether it's single tier or lower tier or upper tier. All the powers and responsibilities are exactly the same. It's interesting, the power also came in 2001 to allow municipalities to change the title. And that happened in Renfrew County, which is in the Ottawa Valley. Well, this about 10 years ago, I guess. The townships, and there are a number of them, all had reeves as the head of council, and they all talked amongst each other about having a mayor rather than a reeve. And they decided to change, and each municipality changed the title from reeve to mayor. And how did they do that? They passed bylaw. They exercised the power to pass bylaw. So municipalities now can choose any name they wish. Doesn't have to be one of those, it can be something else. There is one municipality that has a different title for its head of council, and it has a Lord Mayor. And that municipality is Niagara-on-the-Lake. And it got that title not by after 2001, but before 2001, and it had to have special legislation of the provincial legislature to adopt that name. And it's in place, and it's been there for a long time now. So heads of council, the first responsibility is that they preside over council meetings. And that's true right across the province. There are 444 municipalities in the province, and 443, the head of council has an obligation to preside over council meetings. The one that does not is the City of Toronto. And the City of Toronto was given authority a number of years ago to have the mayor appoint someone to chair the council meetings. And frankly, I would do the same, I think, if I were in that situation. Council meetings in Toronto are 3-day affairs. They go on for 3 days. And that's a long time for an individual, particularly the head of council, to be in the meeting. The Act, though, is more specific and detailed than simply presides over council meetings. It says that the head of council presides over council meetings so that they are run efficiently and effectively. Efficiently and effectively. That's a pretty high standard. So mayors need to be trained in terms of how to conduct meetings. I can tell you this, it is very different looking out from the chair of the meeting than it is as a member of the meeting. So the head of council's view of the world is a very different one than councillors. The responsibilities are different. This obligation to preside efficiently and effectively is really, really important. And it was put in the Act to ensure that councils were, in fact, functioning in an appropriate manner. The Act provides that the head of council provides leadership to council. Notice it doesn't say to the municipal organization, it says to council. And that's significant. We're going to see in a few minutes that the leadership to staff, to the administration, rests with the chief administrative officer. So the province is creating this 2 streams, if you will. And the head of council's responsibility is to the elected side, to the council side. Heads of council have a very different responsibility than other members of council. And that is that the Act says that they speak on behalf of the municipality. So how do they know what to say? Well, the municipality speaks by passing bylaws and resolutions at council. So the council speaks, the mayor has an obligation to speak on behalf of the municipality and indicate what decisions council has made. That power is not given to councillors. So members of council do not speak on behalf of the municipality unless authorized by council to do so. The last bullet points just talk about one element of this leadership role, if you will, that rests with council, rests with the head of council in terms of providing advice and information to council itself. The head of council historically has been the chief executive officer, the CEO of the municipal corporation. If you have a business background, you're saying, well, CEO is the person responsible for day-to-day management of the organization. And this became a huge issue back around 2005. And the municipal sector, frankly, was split. A number of people said, get rid of this chief executive officer title, it's confusing. Because people are confusing it with what is in private business. Others said, no, keep it, but define it. And so the province had to make a decision, and it did. It made a decision to keep the title, but set out the responsibilities. And you'll find a section in the Municipal Act that sets out what it means for a head of council, for a mayor, to be the chief executive officer. If you read the list, the conclusion that you will come to is that the role of mayor is as a champion of the municipality, cheerleader for the municipality, if you will. There is nothing in that section that gives any day-to-day management duties to the head of council. People have the perception that the mayor has these responsibilities. The fact is, he or she does not. There's a difference between a CEO, which is Chief Executive Officer, the mayor, and the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer. The Chief Administrative Officer is the person within the municipal organization who has day-to-day management responsibilities and is the senior administrator, reports to council, provides advice to council. And the administration all flows up to that one individual. It's an important role. It kind of leads me to, I think there are two people within the municipal organization, two staff members, that if you're thinking of running for council, you might want to have a chat with. The first is the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer. And that title, by the way, can change. Some places have town managers or city managers or administrators. As long as they have the duties that are set out in the Act for the CAO, that's the responsibility that they carry. The title doesn't matter as to what it is. So the CAO is one person you might want to have a chat with in terms of policy issues, in terms of what the municipality is doing. The other person that I think I want to just mention for a moment on staff is the clerk, the municipal clerk. Municipal clerks are what are referred to as statutory officers. And by that, it means that they are appointed by council, by bylaw, to the role of municipal clerk. And once they're appointed, they are given a number of duties and responsibilities contained within statutes. That's why the term statutory officer, or regulations under a statute. The clerk is a good example. Clerk has responsibilities given to he or she by the province, including, for example, conducting the election, recording the proceedings of council meetings, licensing marriage licenses, and performing marriages, as a matter of fact, as well. Number of responsibilities that go with it. There are other statutory officers, treasurer, chief building official, fire chief. They all have responsibilities given once they're appointed to the office by council, by bylaw. They have a job description from the province and the municipal job description as well. So clearly you're going to be talking to the municipal clerk if you're going to be signing up to be a candidate. You may want to just have a chat with them, and there'll be some other things that you may want to discuss with them, and we'll come to that in a few minutes. This is a summary of what's in the Municipal Act in terms of staff, the administration. And I think it's a section that's really well written because it gives you a real sense of what it's about. First obligation is staff undertake research and provide advice to council. Well, what is that? It's the agenda that's put together and the reports that are there with recommendations. So staff are the primary source. The province recognizes that staff are the primary source of information and advice to council. So staff have an obligation to provide it, and council an obligation to receive it. Staff puts together the agendas for meetings. but it does so based on what council has said is the order of business. And you'll find the order of business, the order in which things are discussed or put forward in the procedure bylaw. And that's, again, that's council has approved that. And staff, in effect, are filling in the various parts in order to put an agenda together. So first responsibility is to undertake the research and provide advice to council. Those are the reports and the recommendations within those reports. Once council has made a decision, staff have an obligation to implement that decision. And that's fundamental. And we'll, the next slide will give you a kind of an image of what that's like. So council makes decisions, staff have an obligation to implement those decisions. And a lot of that decision making is around budget time, where staff will make recommendations on the budget. Council will approve the budget. And then once that's approved, staff will undertake the decisions made by council. This section goes on to say that staff have to establish a number of practice, procedures, and policies. And every department has them. These aren't council policies. These are staff policies. These are how they get the day-to-day work done. And every department has them. And they're important, and the Act says they're important for this reason, and that is to carry out council's decisions. It recognizes again that council is the decision-making body, and staff does the implementation. I've used this slide for a long time, or something similar. And I debate whether to take it out each time, but I don't. And I leave it in because I like the image. Council should steer the boat rather than row it. Council is setting the direction, the policy, making the decisions, and staff have an obligation to row it. So as it says, council decides the services and programs, and it then leaves it up to staff how to deliver those services and those programs. It's from a book back, I think, in the 70s, called Reinventing Government by Osborne and Gabler. I'm not even sure it's still in print, but it's a really good image and a really good sense of what are the responsibilities within the organization in terms of the elected side, the council side, and the staff side. So I want to talk about how council makes decisions. And I refer to this as municipal governance. And it's really fundamental to have a sense of how this plays out, because it's true right across the province. Council receives advice and information from staff. And we know that the province has indicated that's the primary source of information and advice. But there are other sources as well. Every council can create a committee and a committee structure. And I have to tell you, there are a lot of different committee structures around the province. Different municipalities create different types of committees for different purposes. So why would council create a committee? What's the purpose of a committee? Well, fundamentally, it's to provide advice and make recommendations to council. It's to do some research and provide recommendations to council. Committees don't make decisions, committees make recommendations. Council, when it creates a committee, sets out the mandate. Committees don't create their own mandate. Council will populate the committee, put members onto the committee, and they can be members of the public, and they can be members of council. Council may even appoint the chair. Council may even put a timeline on when the committee has to report back. These are committees created by council for specific purposes determined by council itself. They play an important role and an important function. And some municipalities, not many, but there are a few, where there are no committees. Councils are small communities, and they have decided that council can work without having committees, and that they can move decisions through council more quickly than by having a committee structure. But that's pretty rare. The next advice and information council receives from the public. I said before that the courts have said that the primary purpose of the public at council meetings is to observe how decisions are being made. And that's fundamental. But there's also an ability for members of the public to appear at council meetings. Now, they don't have an unrestricted ability. They have to appear following the rules that council has set out in its procedure bylaw. And that generally is a delegation process where delegations come forward, or deputations, you can call them either one. And again, there's no inherent right for the public to come and speak at council meetings except through this delegation process. And council will set the rules, the amount of time, what has to be, when it has to be put in, and all of the various issues relating to it. So the public's role is to provide advice at the council meetings through a delegation process. And the public's going to be giving advice to individual members of council in the community. That's that public role that we talked about right at the outset. But in terms of the meetings, there's a delegation process that needs to be followed. I talked about the connection of local boards to the municipality and how some of those services are provided by local boards. The connection also includes budgeting between local board and the municipality, and that process is different for every local board, because at the end of the day, council is going to be, the municipality is going to be collecting the funds for these agencies to operate and to function. Council has the responsibility of collecting the taxes. If you're thinking of running for council, you better love meetings. I mean, you better really love meetings, because you're going to spend a lot of your life over the next 4 years in meetings. I had someone say to me not long ago, it's 2 meetings a month, and that's it. That's all I have to do to be on council. And I said, well, no, that's not really true. There are a lot of meetings. There are regular meetings of council. There may be special meetings of council. There are committee meetings. And members of council could be on several committees. There are local boards. For example, you might be on the library board or the health unit or whatever. And there are other community agencies that you may be part of as well. Meetings will take up a considerable part of your life going forward once you're elected to council. And if you're going to be spending that much time in meetings, you better get good at it. Because if you're not good at it, you're going to get really frustrated, because you're not going to be succeeding in getting some of the things that you want through council and approved and put into place within your community. Meetings are a really significant part of what council members do. That's where decisions are made. That's where policy is set. So if you're thinking of running for council, you better love meetings, and you really need to make an effort to get good at them. It makes a huge difference. There are 2 documents in the municipality that I think are the 2 most important documents. One is the annual budget, and that sets your policy for the current year, and also looks at a capital program that goes out several years. But the other document that I think is really significant, really important, is the procedure bylaw. Procedure bylaw, again, is approved by council, and it does a number of things. It sets the rules of engagement for meetings. what the rules are, and council gets to set its own procedure bylaw. There are a few things that the province requires, but fundamentally, the municipality has the ability to create the procedure bylaw to fit within your community. But it's more than just the rules of engagement, the rules for the meetings. It's also this governance model that sets your committee structure and what the mandate of the committees will be. It also defines relationships between members of council, between councillors and the head of council, between council and staff, and between council and the public. And it has provision in it relating to all those relationships. It also has issues around inappropriate conduct at council meetings, at meetings generally. And that's significant, and it's been significant in some communities in some detail in the last few years. So procedure bylaw is one of those documents, if you're thinking of running for council, that I recommend that you read. And you read before you make the decision whether to run for council. It is going to be a significant document. Let me just share with you, I get a lot of calls during the term of council from municipalities around the province. And often the call comes because they're having difficulties, and they're having difficulties in a couple of different ways. One is around the relationships, the roles and responsibilities we talked about earlier, but the other is around meetings. And one of the things I do if I'm called about issues around meetings is before someone at the municipality explains to me the problem, I go and read the procedure bylaw. And I can predict with pretty regular, pretty accurate prediction what the problem is. It's inherent within the bylaw. So good procedure bylaws are really valuable. They're really important. They make a difference on all those different areas I talked about. I urge you to take a look, find the one for the city and read it through. It's going to become an important part of your life. As I say, meetings become really significant. It's election day and you've been elected and you won. And you're pretty happy, you're on cloud nine and everybody loves you. That won't last, but feeling of elation. But your life will change as of that day. People will begin to see you differently. People will begin to talk to you differently. People will talk to you who never talked to you before. People will stop you at the grocery store or at the gas station because they want to share their ideas, because you are now a community leader. And that's really significant in terms of how your life changes. And people watch you. People listen to you, perhaps more today than ever in history. People are paying attention to what you're saying. So you need to be cautious. You need to be thoughtful about what you're saying or putting in print on the computer. People treat you differently. You may be thinking that you're running for a part-time position, but I can tell you this, it is 24/7. I'm not suggesting you give up your full-time job to take this on, because most municipalities across the province, the position is a part-time one. But I can tell you this, it consumes all your time. If you wake up at 3 in the morning, what you will be thinking about is issues relating to the municipality. Municipal government will consume you. And I've seen it time and time again, and it requires your total commitment. And I'll talk about what that means in a few minutes. I made a habit recently, well, the last few years, of talking to both staff and members of council who have left the municipality, no longer on council, or they've left the municipality, the municipal sector. And I asked them, reflecting back on what their life is like then and now, and to a person, they say that they had no idea how much their role in local government consumed them entirely. They were part of the community, but the people in the community looked at them differently. The issues were immediate. Local government makes decisions around the life of people in the community every council meeting, and it has an impact. It requires your commitment, and it, as I say, it will consume you. There's no question about it. The other thing I think it's important to do if you're thinking of running for council is talk to your significant other, because your being on council has an impact on them as well. People will talk to them differently. If you as a council make a decision that is not a happy one for some parts of the community, that will impact on how your family gets treated when they go to the store or when they're in the community. They need to be ready for calls that come in for things that are on social media. We're going to see more and more on social media in terms of impact. It's an important conversation to have. They will interact with the public just as, not as much as you do, but they will interact with the public and have an impact. And they should be aware of that. You need to have, in my opinion, that discussion right at the outset. I said before that if you're going to be on council, you better love meetings. Well, you also better love to read. I mean, you better really love to read. You will find as a member of council that there is a relentless stream of documentation that you have to read. There are agendas, there are reports, other materials coming out, and it is never ending. It comes for every single council meeting, comes for committee meetings, and you have an obligation. If you're going to commit to this, you have an obligation to read it all. I made a comment a few weeks ago that when I left Sudbury, we were up to about 160, 170 pages for a council report. And someone in the audience said, our municipality, it's over 400 pages for every council meeting. That's astounding. That's a lot of material. You have to read every page. And you have to read every page for two reasons. The first reason is you have to be prepared. You've committed to this role and to being effective. You need to know what's on the agendas. You need to be ready to contribute in a meaningful way. I've over the years seen members of council who at a council meeting will ask a question, the answer to which is found in the third paragraph of the staff report on page 1. They hadn't read the report. They weren't ready for the meeting. You need to be prepared to read every page. The second reason you need to be prepared to read every page is a personal one. And that is, there may be buried in there somewhere a conflict of interest for you. And you need to be aware of it. And because you have obligations under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act in terms of declarations and what your conduct has to be if you do have a pecuniary interest. That's important. That's really significant. And they can show up coming to council, for example, through a committee. Committee may report or the committee minutes may come forward, and that's where the conflict could be. If you haven't read all that material, you could find yourself in some difficulty. And you'll see in a few minutes when we talk about conflict of interest that it can happen to you very, very quickly. The other thing about reading all the reports that I think is significant is it takes time. And preparation time for meetings can be a significant amount of time. Think about reading 150 pages every week and perhaps more. You need to find the time. I know counselors in Sudbury, when I was there, used to spend late Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. That was their time most of them, their time to read council agendas and other materials that were coming at them for that week. Again, it's time away from your family. And it's a commitment, I absolutely think that you have to make if you're considering running for council. I want to talk about this kind of a slide that moves us into other areas. I mentioned earlier about your role is not to direct staff, or you're not a manager of staff. It's referred to in municipalities as micromanagement. And I can tell you, a council member who decides to micromanage, try to direct staff to do certain work, will cause more disruption and more people will be more upset within your organization than you can ever imagine. It defeats morale throughout your organization, and it's really inappropriate. It's not why you're there. It's not why you're running for council. We've seen some municipalities around the province where incivility has been an issue. Incivility's always been present, but in some places it's not an issue at all, and in other places it's taken over as in a very significant way. Parts of the training that come after council is elected, the new training for the new council, deals with incivility, what it is, what uncivil conduct looks like, and how you can deal with it as a council and as an individual. It's an important area. I'm going to talk in a few minutes about confidentiality and the importance of understanding confidentiality and some of the elements of it. And then I want to get into now personal responsibilities. And we're going to talk about codes of conduct, Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and then I'll talk about water for just a few moments because that has some personal responsibilities to it. Up until just a few years ago, I think it was 2018, but it might be 19, there were a few municipalities around the province that had codes of conduct for members of council and local boards and committees. They weren't mandatory. The province says the municipality can have one if it wishes to do so. And if it does, it has to have an integrity commissioner whose responsibility was to investigate when complaints were made and report to council. It is now mandatory. Every municipality has to have an integrity commissioner and a code of conduct. And the code of conduct, the province has passed a regulation that sets out some of the required subject matters that has to be included in the code. And that regulation, one of the subject matters that gets dealt with in it is the requirement to cover off confidentiality. So it's part of the code responsibilities. The integrity commissioner's scope of duties expanded. They still have a responsibility to investigate. They have to now educate council, members of council, and the public on the code, on ethical behavior. And they have this new responsibility, which is a really interesting one for members of council. If a member of council needs advice, he or she can write to the integrity commissioner. It has to be in writing. A question relating to the code or to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And the Act requires that the integrity commissioner, the IC, respond in writing. Now that's a really helpful service for members, and one that wasn't there previously. And in fact, members of council often would hire their own lawyer at their own expense to pay for opinions with respect to this. They now have the ability to go to an integrity commissioner for advice. There was an interesting thing that happened at Queen's Park in the last while. There was a private member's bill introduced, Bill 10, and here was the title to it. It was called, I'm going to read it, the Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act. The Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act 2022. And it provided that if council passed a resolution, it could do so to direct the integrity commissioner to apply to the court to have a member of council removed from council. It got unanimous support on first reading. It did not make it through, so it has died on the order paper because of the election. But it's an interesting observation and an interesting trend. A lot of that, I think, came from the situation in the city of Ottawa, where one member of council has been accused and found to have breached the code by the integrity commissioner, and it's had a lot of publicity right across Canada in the last while. The Municipal Conflict of Interest Act came into effect in 1972, and it came into effect because in pre-72, if a member of council, for example, owned a business in town and wanted to supply goods or service to the municipality, they were prohibited from doing so. The legislation did not allow it. So this legislation, this Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, was brought into effect to allow members to be on council and to have pecuniary interest, to have conflicts. And they had to be dealt with in a very specific way. The Act talks about pecuniary interests, and it talks about a number of different types. The most obvious one is a direct pecuniary interest. So if I own Fred's Widget Shop on Main Street, and I want to supply widgets to council or to the municipality, I can do so. And what I have to do at the beginning, I have to do a number of things, but at the beginning of the meeting, I have to declare that I have a direct pecuniary interest because I own Fred's Widget Shop. And that will get recorded in the minutes. There's other obligations, and I'll come to those in a minute. The Act also talks about a number of indirect pecuniary interests, and these include family, parent, spouse, or child, if the interest is known to the member. It also includes employer, employee, corporate shareholders and officers in different types of corporations, membership in some bodies within your community. There's a detailed list of what is an indirect pecuniary interest. And they're the ones that are more difficult to find. And they're the ones, when you're going through that material, remember I said you had to read all that material, they're the ones that you're looking for, because they're not going to be as obvious to you as the direct pecuniary interest potentially. So if a member has a pecuniary interest, I said the first thing they have to do is declare it verbally at the meeting. At the beginning of the meeting, there's an item on the agenda that says declarations of pecuniary interest in the general nature. So they declared verbally, the clerk records that in the minutes. And if you're a member, you have to go back and check to make sure it was recorded properly. But the province has now said, not only must a member declare verbally, they must also file a written declaration with the clerk. So my advice to members now is read the written declaration at the meeting and then hand it to or email it to the clerk, so that the clerk has both the verbal and the written. And the clerk then takes those two and puts them in a registry. And that registry is to be found on the website, municipal website. It's available to the public, and it will indicate every time a member declared a pecuniary interest on what matter, at what meeting, and what was the general nature of the declaration or of the pecuniary interest. So again, that's part of this accountability and transparency, the ability of the public to see when a member has a personal interest, a pecuniary interest. Well, by the way, pecuniary means financial. It's a financial interest in the matter. If a member does have a pecuniary interest and they've declared, there are a number of other things that they have to take into consideration. When the item comes up at the council or the committee meeting, they may not participate. It says may, they shall not participate. And they shall not vote. They can't be part of the deliberation at all or the decision making. But they also have an obligation to not influence. And that means not influence before the meeting, anytime before, during a meeting, or anytime after. It also means influence not only other members of council, but also staff. So if they have a pecuniary interest, they really have to remove themselves from the decision-making process, the council decision-making process. Over the years, I've had a few people, a couple in particular, stand out that came to the session, this session, and they came up to me after and they said, you know, I basically said the same thing. I own a piece of property and I want to develop it. And I thought I would run for council because I could probably get it through the system quicker from the inside than the outside. And they said, I realized I can't deal with it from the inside. I'm taken right out of the equation. And I said, that's right. And they both chose not to run. They would have been terrible members of council. They were one-issue candidates. Their interest was completely self-serving, and they wouldn't be able to achieve what they were out to achieve. That they could be more effective on the outside, working with the municipality to obtain the approvals that were required. I wanted to point out a book to you, and let me see if we can hold this up and you can see it. It's called Ontario's Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, a handbook. Ontario's Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, a handbook. It's published by Municipal World. If you go to the Municipal World website, you'll find a number of books there, but this one is there. This takes every section of the Act from 1972 up to, this is published in 2019, and discusses it and takes every single case from 72 to 2019 and summarizes it and talks about specific issues. If you're thinking of running for council and you think you'll find yourself in a situation where you're going to have pecuniary interests, I recommend that you get a copy of that book and read it through so that you're comfortable and you're familiar with some of the concepts. Historically, up until not long ago, the Act says if an elector in your community, not in your ward, but in the community, if an elector believes that a member has breached the Conflict of Interest Act, that person, that elector, could bring a court application. Now, that's an expensive process, and that probably over the years has limited the number of cases that are to be found under this legislation. That's still available, but what's now available that I think is important to pay attention to is the fact that an elector, and in fact they've expanded, the province has expanded, it's beyond electors now, it includes other categories of people, can complain not to the court, but to the integrity commissioner. And that's a far less expensive process, as you can imagine. And the result is the number of complaints are up, not surprising. It is easier now for someone to start the process claiming that a member of council has a pecuniary interest and they have breached the act. An elector can still bring the application to court, but I'm only aware of one circumstance where that happened. All the other cases have gone through the Integrity Commissioner. Here's the key. The municipality is paying for all this. Municipality pays for the costs dealing with complaints under the Code of Conduct and with complaints under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And some municipalities have spent a lot of money on conduct of its members and on allegations of breaches of the conflict of interest legislation. These are important areas. So I urge you to get a copy of the book. I urge you to read the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. I don't generally recommend people read provincial legislation because it's technical. Certainly don't ever try to read the Municipal Act. It's hundreds of pages long and technical. But the Conflict of Interest Act you may want to read, but I would first read the book that goes with it. Let me just mention confidentiality quickly. Community leaders carry around with them a lot of confidential information. It comes with the job. And it's important that they be aware of what is confidential and what isn't. And it can be in writing, it can be on a device, it can be carrying it around in their head. And they have to, each member has to be cautious about who they're talking to, who they're sharing information with, and making the determination whether it's confidential or not. Breaching the confidentiality, as I said before, is a breach of the Code of Conduct. And it may have more serious consequences even than that, but it's something that is really significant. And you need to be cautious. You need to be cautious about conversations you're having with people in the community, whether it's the coffee shop or on the internet. If you're not sure, as a member of council, the advice I always have is call the CAO. And in Sudbury, the advice I gave was call me, and we would talk about it. A reminder again that you do not speak as a councillor for the municipality. That's a role that falls to the mayor. Let me talk about the Safe Drinking Water Act just for a few minutes. And I'm doing this as an example of the regulatory and technical nature of some of the services provided by the municipality. After Walkerton, the province responded with a piece of legislation called the Safe Drinking Water Act 2002 and brought that act into effect. And at the time, it was considered one of the very best safe drinking water pieces of legislation in the world. Pretty significant. And the province created the Walkerton Clean Water Center, which is a research center in Walkerton. It doesn't supply water to Walkerton. It's a research center, and it's an amazing place. When that act came into effect, province brought the act into effect, but didn't bring into effect a section that imposed personal liability on decision makers. Who are the decision makers? Well, we know it's members of council because your responsibility is to make decisions. It's also senior staff, and it's your chief water operator. But the act came in without having this section imposing personal liability coming into effect. And frankly, as a sector, we didn't pay much attention until 2012, 10 years later. And the province announced at the Association of Municipalities conference in August that that section was coming into effect on January 1st, 2013. We scrambled as a sector to begin to train decision makers, members of council and others, in terms of what their role was, what their responsibilities were, what was appropriate conduct under the circumstances. Interestingly, I had the opportunity to do training on this legislation right across the province. At a conference in, I think it was March, early March or late February in Toronto, there were a number of delegates there, but the training session had about 75, 100 people at it. And just 2 weeks before that, there was a case of an incident that occurred a number of years before. And the result of the case was a substantial fine for the municipality and a substantial fine for the chief water operator and a jail sentence of 30 days for the water operator. At that training session, at the break, the mayor of that municipality came up to me and said, could I talk to the group? And I said, yeah, that would be terrific. And here's what he said. He said, council has been told that had that section been in effect when the incidents occurred in his municipality, they've been told by the lawyers for the municipality and the lawyers for the MOE that every member of council would have been charged. That's a huge impact. Municipalities carry insurance, number of policies, and it covers not only the municipal corporation, but members of council and staff. But there's an expectation that you are acting in a way that's appropriate to act for a person in your position. In other words, you need to be trained on what you're required to do and what you're required to ask and the information you are required to gather around safe drinking water. As I said here, it's a matter of health and safety. And it's one example of the regulatory scheme that is in place for municipalities that affects municipalities, most municipalities across the province. It's a matter of health and safety. The public has no sympathy if you don't get the supply of safe drinking water correct. It's an important aspect of what you do. So let's just sum it up quickly. Hopefully by now you have a better understanding of what role you're being elected to fulfill and what the mandate is, and what more maybe is equally important, what role you're not being elected to fulfill. Municipal powers rest with the council sitting as a body, not with individual members of council or staff. You're not a manager. You have no ability to micromanage your organization. Management responsibilities rest with the CEO and the department heads. Get a sense of your personal obligations. What does the code of conduct say? How are you impacted, if at all, by the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Important to have that sense of that. Are you getting the training that's appropriate in areas of responsibility, some of the technical areas that you are dealing with? Finally, talk to your family, because it impacts not only you as an individual, but it impacts the family as well. And I think you need to have that conversation and that discussion. Finally, it says congratulations, and I mean it. If you're thinking of running for council, whether you do or not, but even thinking of giving up your time and getting involved and providing leadership to your community is really significant, is really important, and I congratulate you for that. So Heather, why don't I make the slideshow disappear? And how do I get back to this?
Just hover over the bottom there and say, or it might be up your top and say stop sharing.
There we go. All right.
Okay, thank you, Fred. That was a great presentation and definitely has a lot of information. for people to consider, and just, how it impacts your life. Being a member of council can be rewarding for, the visionary guidance that council provides, but it can also place a lot of demands on people's personal lives. So it's always helpful for people to understand the significant role that council plays. So now I'd like to open it up for questions. And because we're a smaller group tonight than our first session, if you do have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself and jump right in, so we don't have to go in order of hands or anything like that. So I'll open the floor to questions that you might have for Fred or myself.
Hello, Fred. Mark LaBelle here. Thank you, Heather and Fred, for setting this up. I really appreciate it. This is the second meeting I've come to. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I have a couple of questions. With the closed meetings, and let's say we're dealing with an issue with staff, does the council have, I remember seeing under the closed meetings heading that there was ability to change staff or to adjust staff. Isn't that more of an HR issue as opposed to a council issue, or does it go to HR and then come to council?
Usually it starts in HR. It may go to council. Council will then refer it back to staff for action to be taken if necessary.
So, for example, if we had, if a council member had a problem with the way a staff was responding to something, or we weren't satisfied with the work output of a staff member, we would then take that to HR, or would we
you
deal
might
with that
take
at the level?
You might take it to HR. You might take it to the CAO to have that conversation. The CAO
okay.
has HR has responsibilities, but the management, the day-to-day management responsibilities rest with the CAO for the entire administration.
Fred, it may be helpful to
Okay.
kind of go over the council has one employee.
Yeah, there's a concept, Heather, that's a good point. There's a concept that council, it's not true, by the way, but the concept is the council has one employee, and that employee is the CAO, and the CAO reports to council.
Oh,
All of the
I see.
staff, other staff, report to the CAO through their various managers through the organization. Technically, all the employees are employees of the corporation, but the image that Heather's talking about, that people talk about, is that the council has this one person who provides advice, is responsible for getting advice to council, and also is responsible for the administration. And council has a concern, that's where that should be expressed, and then it goes on. It shouldn't be going to the HR, in my opinion. It should be going to the CAO.
That's really good. Thank you, Heather, for that one employee hint. I'll remember that. The other thing I wanted to ask about, when we just near the end, when you were talking about the Drinking Water Act and about how council was liable for public safety, are there any other liabilities under public safety that council would also be responsible, similar to the Water Act? Like, let's say somebody drives over a pothole and they suffer an injury. Would that be almost the same circumstance of coming back to council and then suing council or complaining about council about that?
You would think so, wouldn't you? But it isn't. And again, you have to go to the legislation. The province has said any claim relating to roads. So if you're in a car accident, or if you hit a pothole, as you say, and you want to sue the municipality, the act says you may only sue the municipal corporation. You can't sue individuals. You can't sue members of council. You can't sue the public works director, or the CAO, or the guy driving the truck, whatever. You have to sue.
Okay.
And that's different than the water that says MOE can come after individuals. not
Exactly, that was my
corporation.
point.
So you have to look at each of the activities and see what the legislation requires. I guess that's the point I'm making.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you both. This has been very informative. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah. Hi, Fred. Hi, Heather. It's Jay. I just wanted to get some details on how a counselor could use the position to put forward an individual vision for the town or the municipality. Like I guess you're, like you said, what was that? We are steering the boat. So I guess there must be some capacity to enact on a vision. But Fred, could you give me some examples?
That's a great question. Remember, I started off by saying I think the two factors that are important to me are integrity and vision. If you got a vision, how do you get it out there? How do you begin discussions on it? You can do a few things. You're going to have some discussions with staff, with CAO, and with other staff potentially. That's certainly the case. But if you want to get it before council, it's important, and I didn't get into this tonight, but it's something I spend a lot of time with new councils, how you as a member get something on an agenda, because that's what you really want to do. I mean, you're going to be talking to other councillors and you're going to say, you know, I want to get this on an agenda that may get eventually a staff report or get the council thinking about this particular vision I have. And the process that I always recommend is called notice of motion, where you can file a notice of motion at a meeting tonight, and that's the motion that you're asking council to consider, and it goes on a future meeting, the next meeting. And what that notice of motion does is tell everybody this is coming. So that's part of this transparency and accountability issue. Again, it gives everybody the opportunity to see what's coming. It allows you as a member to put things before council and to get things that you are interested in moving forward before council. So it may also, you may be able to see it as and I'm just looking at avenues, is to get something through committee, get started at the committee stage and get staff perhaps to put a report on committee to look at it. Not everybody's going to support what you're asking for. Understand that, but if you can find some support on council and staff to get the ball rolling, it at least has some opportunities to move forward. Good question.
That's for some, thanks. That's where some of the politicking comes in.
Yeah, no, not some.
All, yeah, that's right.
And actually, Jay, can I just add to that, just
Sure.
to put a little bit of a local spin on that question. So, and just to kind of show you how it actually does work. And we do have a notice of motion provision within our procedural bylaw, and it is used by members of council. So just for an example, a couple of years ago, Councillor McMillan, he had been talking regularly at the environmental committee about a sustainability action committee, a climate change committee, what we were doing about climate change, all of those things that were very important to him. And not saying that it wasn't necessarily important to other members of council, but there really just wasn't anything happening, and it wasn't coming up through the budget process. So Councillor McMillan put forward a notice of motion that got the ball rolling. So what that did was, staff now need to action that item. They have to come back with, okay, so how are we going to deal with the notice of motion? It gets it before council, and things started happening. And just in April, or might have been March, all the days flow together. We finally completed our sustainability action plan and, climate action plan. So it takes time, but there are ways, and that's a perfect example to just show you that something that you see as a vision for council. And there's all sorts of other things. We're always, our strategic planning process, our parks and recreation master plan. We have, plans that council is very involved with. And that is the time for you to make sure priorities are also included in those. Our budgeting process is also another process where, you know, you have a vision, let's just say, you know, you'd like to see improvements to Norman Park. Well, that's the place that we start talking about, okay, how are we going to fund that vision? And so there's all sorts of avenues. The notice of motion gets the ball rolling. And then there are other places where those, you have those opportunities.
Good. Thanks, Heather.
And I think the reality too is you're going to be more successful at that if you have a sense of how the rules of procedure work.
Right.
And how to move items through council and through committee, and again, dealing with staff to help you out with it. Good questions.
Hi, it's Gloria. Thank you for holding this meeting. Very informative. Further to Jay's question, that's if after you get elected, before you get elected, and if you're lucky to get elected. So while you're running, can you present your vision that you want to bring to council?
I hope so.
Okay, because we have all these avenues and how to get the ball rolling once we're there, but in order to get possibly public support or even the other councilors' support, we would be bringing our own vision to our own platform while running.
Let me just make one comment on that, because it's kind of an interesting situation. I've seen candidates go out saying, if I'm elected, I'm going to do this. And they get elected and they suddenly realize they've hit a brick wall because they can't do it. It takes this process and this council to make decisions, and staff have to be part of the process in terms of providing advice. So if you're going to take your vision out as part of the campaign, I think you frame it in terms of, here's my vision. I want to encourage council and the community to get involved with it, as opposed to saying, I'm going to bring this vision to reality. It's a process, because you can't deliver on that promise, because it takes the rest of council, or it takes the majority of council to get you there.
Right.
And I guess just what I'll add to that, Gloria, is part of the election process this year, we've launched a new website, and as part of that website, we're asking all candidates who do file their nomination papers to provide us their candidate profiles and to provide us what they are, you know, what are their priorities and really what they would bring to council as a priority if they were elected. So it is another opportunity for the public to be able to review and see what you are, you know, what you're campaigning on, what's important to you.
Yep.
Great, good. Thank you very much.
Mark here again. Is that available for the public to see those people that are running?
Yeah,
and what
absolutely.
their platforms are?
Yeah, I have a new election.
Is there anybody up already?
No, no one has filed yet.
Okay. But we can see that on the town website. Sorry, city website.
Yeah, it's actually canouravotes.ca. It's an independent standalone site.
Okay.
Jay, did you have another question? I think I might have interrupted you.
I do have other questions, but I wasn't about to ask it. I was going to wait for other people. So I see Logan has a hand up. Maybe I'll wait, Heather, but I do have another one.
Yeah, absolutely. We love questions.
Okay, good.
So Logan.
One of my questions would be, are there any restrictions on the profession we currently have, like our day jobs? Because I work in partnership with public servants, so I wasn't sure if I work with a public service, if that would exclude me.
Best advice I can give you is read the book and read the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Candidates aren't as lucky as elected people, because you cannot ask the integrity commissioner for an opinion until you're elected. But I think you need to do some research to satisfy yourself that your situation is such that it's not going to create great problems for you.
All right, I could ask mine now if you're ready. Okay, so this one is about just the time commitment, Fred. And I think it's important that I attended this session because then you come into it without the blinders on. And maybe this is a question for you, Heather, but what is the obligation for a counselor in terms of committees? Is it 2 committees? Is it 5, 10? And I know there's 2 council meetings per month. I'm just trying to get a picture because I am working full time and I will be and Fred, I really appreciate you noting that this is 24/7, but in terms of a practical assessment of the required time, just so I'm able to give it the time it deserves. Is there any estimate, Heather?
Yeah, I have no problem answering that. So typically what happens with our boards and committees is when we start going through the orientation sessions, boards and committees do come to council and they have that discussion. And you will find that amongst the 7 members of council, there will be varying interests. Not everyone is going to have the same level of interest. Some are going to be very interested in something over another. And there's also varying time, time opportunities. So a member of council that's retired and doesn't work full time has more time to commit to bigger committees or more committees. So you will see it often happens where you might have one member of council that'll sit on 3 and one sits on 1. There's nothing that says you must take 2 committees or you must take 4 committees. It's encouraged that they try to split them evenly. And honestly, I've never seen where there isn't a fair split. And none of our existing committees are extremely onerous, with the exception of the Kenora District Services Board. That's a big time commitment. And it is very governance heavy, similar to being on council. And the second one to that is probably the Northwestern Health Unit, which has been obviously busier than ever in the last 2 years, given the pandemic. So the rest of our boards and committees, planning advisory can be, they usually typically only have 1 meeting a month, but those meetings are very important and they take a lot of time, but a member of council does not sit on those committees. Those are just public members.
Let me just add this.
Sure.
A number of years ago, right after the election, Sudbury Council was appointing members to committees. And it went through the whole process. And it was fascinating. There was a woman elected to council first time. And you know how people, when they want to be invisible, that they'll sit in their chair and they'll kind of slouch down and not make eye contact. She was trying during this entire process to be invisible, and she was good at it. At the end of the night, every member of council was on at least 3 committees, some more. She wasn't on any. She avoided getting on any committees at all. And I went and I saw the mayor the next day and I said, that was really interesting. I'd never seen a member of council do that. And I told him what she did and he was shocked. He said, well, we'll change that. And they did. She made it clear to council she was only interested in 1 committee, and it happened to be at the Region. Sudbury was 2-tier in those days. And the mayor just said, point blank, we're sharing the workload here. Everybody's got to be on a reasonable number of committees, whether it was 2 or 3 or whatever. And council came back and appointed her, put her on different committees, and it was there. But I'd never seen a performance like that in my life. It was fascinating. But Heather said they share the workload. That's exactly what happens. That's what's part of it.
Yeah. Good. Thanks, you too.
Yeah, and Jay, did I answer the rest of as far as time commitment goes? So committees, And then the second part of your question was just meetings. Is that, I know that,
Well, I don't know whether you can even estimate how many hours a week an average counselor might do, but if you have a rough number, I think that would be helpful.
so if you looked at the May meeting, which was yesterday, we had a very heavy agenda and it fluctuates for us. So we have high seasons where obviously, you know, when budgets get approved, we are full steam ahead and we have a lot of things happening. So there's a lot of, you know, more reports coming to council and things like that. And then we, previous to that, for February, March, and April, our agendas were fairly light. So, you know, meetings obviously took less time, but it's really the reading that's required, as Fred stated earlier. It's the prep work. So, you know, that it's a lot of reading. In order to come to the council table, be prepared and make good decisions based on the information that you're being provided. Council is always going to, you know, do their own research outside of what staff information is providing. They're going to have questions, but that's, you know, that's proper governance. That's coming prepared, and that's, you know, doing due diligence in your role as a counselor. But it is a lot of, so if I estimate how many hours, I guess it depends on how much you read at one time. But this most recent agenda as of yesterday, that would have taken council several hours to read all of the material that's presented to them in advance of the meeting. And then we were in council all day yesterday. So we started at 9 and we were done at 4 something. Because we had a public zoning amendment meeting that, you know, a public hearing at 12. We had to go back into regular session. We had closed session. We had a lunch break in there, but yeah, it's it can be a long day sometimes. Another question that comes up often, especially with working professionals, is the meeting times. You know, is there opportunity to change those times to evenings for people that are working? Also people with young families, that's a bit of a concern as well. So what I always tell members of, or anyone that's asking from the public, that the meeting times are not driven by staff. They're in the procedural bylaw. Council passes the procedural bylaw. So while staff will make recommendations on meeting times, it is 100% up to the council that comes into office. So it's one of the first things we talk about during orientation. We say these are our meeting times because they're already established, but the procedural bylaw will come before the new council to say, are there changes to the procedural bylaw? That is the opportunity for the new council to make those changes.
Good information. Thanks, Heather.
Can I just add one other thing? It's more than just meetings. Let me give you an example. I may have told this story the other night. I was city solicitor in Sudbury, and I had some documents I had to drop off to the home of one of the councilors on a Saturday morning. And so I drove over, and he represented the Italian part of the city. So he said, come on, I've got to go to the grocery store. And I said, well, no, I don't need to come. He said, no, come on along. We went to 3 grocery stores. He bought 1 item in each, and it took close to 4 hours. He was a counselor every minute of the way. He was there to talk to people. That is part of the life too. And that you know, it's not preparing for meetings or being at meetings, but it's part of the requirement for the job. You're out there in your community and you're talking to people all the time.
And did that person actually need those items, or was it just an excuse to get out there?
Of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not. He just, you know, it was 1 item in each store. They were small grocery stores, wonderful people. It was really fun, but I promised myself I would never deliver papers to him again on the Saturday.
Yeah.
It is very difficult for, you know, members of council can't go anywhere in the community. Our community is big, but it's not that big. And so everyone knows you. And once you become a member of council, you can't go anywhere without being stopped on several occasions. And sometimes it's people just, stop to say hello, and your counselor, and other times they are going to fill your ear with whatever their concern is. And trust me, I travel with council enough within the community to different events, and we walk 5 steps forward and 15 backwards. So everything just takes longer, and it does impact your family. It impacts, counselors will tell me story after story of how their wives are impacted, their spouses, even kids. And so it is definitely things that you have to think about, and really have those conversations with your families and your partners.
Just to follow up to Jay's question, are we going to be able to do Zoom meetings in the future if we can't make it to council, if things don't really level off with COVID? We'd be able to do more remote.
Do you want me to take that, Fred? Yeah. So I have built electronic meetings right into our procedural bylaw. Again, that bylaw governs council and council meetings and how those meetings take place. So during the pandemic, there was a provision that was added to the Municipal Act, which allows for electronic meetings. And that provision has been added. So yes, we will be in hybrid model. Now, it's not carte blanche. There are rules that go along with electronic meetings, which can all be found within our procedural bylaw. But to simplify the answer, it is yes.
Thank you. I just was thinking about that. And that's the same, obviously, for committees, because committees could make their decision if they wanted to do a Zoom meeting as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, most committees, again, I don't want to blanket them all because they are all a little different. Like, the KDSB is a board, and the accessibility is a committee of council. So we sometimes talk about them in the same, and they're not all the same. But yes, like an accessibility committee, they have continued to meet over Zoom for a long time. So it really is kind of driven by the committee and the members' comfort level.
Thank you.
These decisions are going to be made by municipalities right across the province. Some will say, no, we're going back to live. There's not going to be any virtual. Some will say exactly what Heather said. We're going to have a hybrid of some sort. And some probably are going to stay pretty close to the Zoom type meeting going forward. So we're going to have to see, but it's a decision of the council going forward.
Yep. Logan had a hand up again.
I was going to say, not all the committees are tedious. I sit on the Kenora Library board, and it's always a nice board to sit on, and we have the counselors there, so it's nice to see them there. But that one's not too tedious.
That's a nice board to sit on.
Oh, libraries are so important. Wow.
Yeah.
It is. I love that board. And you know what? The city councilors that sit on it are just absolutely lovely.
Nice. I'm sure they would be happy to hear that. You don't get too many kudos in that role. Okay, are there any other questions? These were fantastic questions tonight, everybody. We really appreciate that. The first session was pretty quiet. So it's really great to hear some questions, and they were all very good questions, very important questions.
Yep.
So one last call, anything else? Okay. Thank you, Fred, again, for your valuable presentation and information. It has been recorded, and I can have that available in case anyone asks following this session. Thank you to everyone attending. If there is anything after this session that you think of, please do not hesitate to reach out. A lot of the material that Fred talked about, those books that he referenced that are on Municipal World, I have those in my office, and I'm happy to borrow them out to anybody that would like to have a look at them. If you are elected to council, trust me, you'll get your own copy, and you can keep it by your bedside for light reading. But I'm happy to answer any questions. And anyone that does come to see me that is interested, it's 100% confidential. I do not share with anybody who's, thinking about running for council or asking questions about council. I'm the returning officer for the election, and that is part of my job. So feel free to reach out anytime by email or phone call or in person, and I'm happy to answer anything that comes up after.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Thanks. Fred.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred.
Everybody.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Heather.
Okay, good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
All right, there we go.
Good.
Yeah, that was great. I'm gonna just stop recording.